Well, hello, everybody. My name is Dan Skip Allen, and this is another episode of the 52 must-see movies and why they matter. On this week's episode, we're going to talk about the James Whale and Universal Pictures classic, The Bride of Frankenstein. On this week, once again, I have my co-host is Mr. Billy Pollihan. Introduce yourself, Billy.
Hello, everybody. My name is Billy Pollihan. I have been a guest on Dan's stuff before, and I will continue to do so because I always have fun. And yes, we are talking about The Bride of Frankenstein, a very good film directed by James Whale, and it is one of the best Universal monster films. Let's get into it.
Yeah, it's not only one of the best Universal monster films, it might actually be what's considered the best Universal monster film, even though I like quite a few of them. The Bride of Frankenstein, if you go on like the AFI's 100 greatest movies list, is listed at like number 50 or something like that. So it's obviously a great film in a lot of different ways. It's just not about a monster and a creation of a female monster. It has allegories about life and relationships and how people are perceived and so forth. And that with that comes, this is a sequel to the first Frankenstein. And James Whale directed both of these. James Whale, and if you have not seen this movie, you should check out a movie that's about James Whale. It's called Gods and Monsters. And it stars Ian McKellen and Brendan Fraser. That is a movie about James Whale. So if you want to learn some of the backstory about James Whale, go get a copy of Gods and Monsters. Phenomenal film. But we're talking about his second foray with Boris Karloff as the monster. We also have Colin Clive as Dr. Frankenstein, Henry, as he's referred to quite a bit in the film. Elsa Lancaster, she plays Mary Shelley. She's in like a framing sequence. Well, half of a framing sequence, the beginning of the movie. And we also have Rena O'Connor. Rue O'Connor. I don't know how to pronounce her name.
Una O'Connor.
Yeah. Say that again, Billy.
Una O'Connor.
Una O'Connor. Maybe it's my writing. I screwed up on her. She plays the old lady, also referred to as Minnie in the film. Then we have Dr. Pretorius. Oh, God. He is the actor known as Ernest Thesiger. And then the bride, or Elizabeth, which is Dr. Henry Frankenstein's wife, is played by Valerie Hobson. They do not have when I was going through the credits and trying to make sure that I had the cast and crew and everybody down, they did not have an actress for the bride. So Billy, if you know the actress that played the bride.
Oh, yeah, that's the interesting thing. The bride herself was played by Elsa Lancaster.
Really?
Yeah, really.
So the framing sequence, the Mary Shelley at the beginning, the framing sequence character, and the bride are played by the same actress?
That's right. You can really tell when it's her face, and they deliberately hide the identity of who played the bride, much like in Frankenstein when they did it for the monster, except this time they didn't reveal it at the end. So that's probably why.
That was very interesting. See, Billy, I knew I had you on here for a reason, because I'm like going down through the credits. I'm like, who's the bride? Who's the bride? It's saying who's Mary Shelley, but it never said who's the bride. So that's great that you knew that. And you're a lover of this film as much as I am. And the music, I'll tell you what, this is a guy who's done a few other films back in this era, back in the day, not just monster films, but other films. Franz Waxman, oh man, what a moody soundtrack this score this film had. All right, let's talk about this cast and the actors and people portraying. Thank you for bringing up Elsa Lancaster.
Of course, yeah. in order to talk about this cast, I have to, of course, go back to the original 1931 Frankenstein and obviously spoil what happened there, because this is technically it's a 2-film arc for a lot of the characters, especially for Henry Frankenstein. Even though in the novel it's Victor, and in the film he has a friend named Victor, and in the movie he has a friend named Victor, and in the novel he has a friend named Henry. So they just switched the names around just because. And yeah, Colin Clive once again is wonderful as Dr. Frankenstein. The best mad scientists are those that with, and we see their point of view. They come off as crazy to the other characters, but not to us. And we sympathize with Dr. Frankenstein. All he wants to do is he wants to push the boundaries of what it is about life. He wants to discover a way to create life. And he does it all with pure intentions. He's not doing this for money. He's not doing this for fame. He's just doing this just to further science. And obviously that didn't go well the first time. And this time he's much more subdued. And he is, for once, outshined by Ernest Thesiger, whatever, as Dr. Pretorius, who's one of the best mad scientists ever. That guy, once when you can't take your eyes off him. There's just something about his his cocky demeanor, and just like, I'm gonna wreck shop. I'm totally going to do better than what you did. Personality. I mean, the dude is drinking in a crypt. And again, Boris Karloff is wonderful as the monster and really brings a subtle humanity to it. And yeah, people just always think that it's just, doesn't take much to play the monster, but a lot of people don't understand that acting is much harder when you have nothing to say. And Boris Karloff was very good at playing this character and conveying emotion without having to say anything, which is much more difficult.
Yeah,
yeah,
you're absolutely right. He does a lot of emotion in this. This one he gets to talk a little bit though. We'll get into that a little bit later. At first, I said there's a framing sequence. So Mary Shelley basically tells these two men that she's with, all right, well, this is the second part to the story. Frankenstein's the first part, but this is the second. So we get this framing sequence. We just pick up right where the last movie led on, which is really great for a sequel to a movie way, way back in 1935. It just picks up right where the last one, the laboratory, the windmill, all that is burning down, and they rescue Henry from the burning ashes, and he's basically passed out for a while in the movie, but then he wakes up, and he's just kind of like loafing around the house, and this guy, which you already mentioned him, he's one of the best mad scientists ever, besides Dr. Frankenstein, is Dr. Pretorius, comes a knocking. And he's like, hey, I need your help. I want to show you something. And he shows him these miniature people, which, what the heck these miniature people that he created were. But he's basically trying to get him to create a bride for the monster who's wrecking havoc, who's still alive, who's running around the land, all over the land. And, of course, you get the pitchforks, you get the flame, you got the sticks with the flame. You got everybody trying to chase him down. He's trying to hide and whatnot. So let's get into that beginning of the movie where we find Frankenstein and Dr. Frankenstein both are alive.
Yeah, it's very funny, because also very dark. I mean, first he murders some guy, and then when Una O'Connor finds him, she overacts at the best I've ever seen. Like, it's overacting at its finest. And yeah, I got to mention this before we continue. The makeup in these films was all done by one guy. His name was Jack Pierce, and the attention to detail that he has is great. Like, we see metal clamps on his head that we had not previously seen before. Like, some of his hair is burned off. Through the course of the film, it starts to grow back a little bit, and he's still in these ragged old clothes. He's in the same clothes that he wore the previous film, so they're like torn and beaten up, and it just shows you that this monster's been through hell. And yeah, he moves a little bit slower. You can tell that he's just been through a rough time, and all that is due to the makeup. And it's not just on Frankenstein, it's also on the bride, whose look is also just as iconic.
All right, so yeah, we get to where, you know, he's just basically going around the countryside trying to go from place to place until he scares somebody, and then he runs off, and they run and get a whole mob of people to come after him. So he's kind of running from here place to place all the time. But we also got this whole thing of this other sub story of Dr. Pretorius and Dr. Henry Frankenstein, and he takes them to his house. He shows them these people. Then he basically says, no, I don't want to be involved in this. That's enough. And so what he ends up having to do is he ends up getting the monster to basically convince Dr. Frankenstein that he has to help get him a bride. And we'll get into that in a second. So that's going to be where the subplot of Dr. Henry Frankenstein is going. But Frankenstein's monster, the monster has some interesting adventures while all this other stuff is going on. He runs into a blind man's house. He's trying to find food, basically. He's hungry. He wants some food. He runs into some gypsies. He tries to get some food from them. They basically, get mad at him and run off, and he burns his hand trying to get a chicken or a turkey out of the fire. And then he runs into this blind man. And basically the blind man kind of takes him in because he's blind. He doesn't see. Like everybody else, they run and scare and they scream. Ah! They run away. Well, this guy's blind. He doesn't know. All he knows is that he can't speak yet. And he helps him. He feeds him. He gives him stuff to drink. So get into some of that stuff, Billy. Yeah, what are your thoughts about where our characters are going from here?
I'm sorry, you kind of cut off a little bit because Google is deciding to do this. What was the question again?
What is your thoughts on where our characters are going from here? Where our monster's going and the things he gets into, and then Dr. Pretorius and Dr. Frankenstein Henry.
Oh, I thought it was done great. It's great setup to the inevitable conclusion. But yeah, the plot with the blind man, let's get into that. That's actually something that was in the original novel, where the monster runs into this small cottage with somebody who happens to be blind. And this blind man is very, very important for the development of the monster because he's actually a friend, and he's never had a friend. He's never had compassion to him before, with the exception of Dr. Frankenstein, who, tries to teach him and all that stuff. But he teaches him, he's like, no, it's okay. Look at me. I'm blind, and people judge me for it. So I have a defect, and I'm an outcast, and it's okay. I've lived a good life. And yeah, we get the infamous fire bad thing when he's like, no, fire is good. He's like, fire no good. And yeah, he has a great time with this man, and it's just very enjoyable just because of how the actors do it. And it also reminds me of Young Frankenstein with the blind guy and that whole setup, which is hilarious. And then the whole thing with Pretorius and Dr. Frankenstein, it's great because this shows how different he has changed from the first film. First film, he was like, okay, let's do this. He was all gung-ho, but now he's learned his lesson. He just wants to spend time with his wife, and live a little quiet life. But Pretorius is like, you know what? I am going to blackmail you, essentially, and we'll get into that a little bit. And yeah, he finds the monster, and there's the scene where the monster comes back with Pretorius to Frankenstein's house, and he goes, Frankenstein, and then Pretorius goes like, yes, there's been some improvements since he's been in my care, and then he's indicating that he was the one that taught him how to speak, which is not true, but it's also, it works because it's like, yeah, I know and can do better with your creation than you ever did. But there's also very good comedic moments in this film. Like when the monster meets Pretorius, it's very funny just because of how nonchalant he is. He's just like, oh, hey, yeah, you're here. I thought I was alone.
Yeah, we're getting a little bit ahead of ourselves here, but so I'll just kind of go quickly over this. Basically, when he's with the blind man, this couple guys show up, and they're like, oh my God, the monster's in this guy's house. They were trying to shoot him, and then he basically beats him up and starts a fire. So the blind man's house burns on fire. He ends up causing the house to burn on fire. He has to escape again. That's when the mob finally catches him in the woods, and they finally have enough people to where they don't run away. They basically hold him down, tie him to a big giant pole, take him, put him in a dungeon, and lock him up in chains in the dungeon of this big castle or whatever it's called. But then he escapes, our monster escapes, and that's when he ends up in the tomb where, because he's trying to hide. Once he escaped, he's trying to hide from the mob. They go, oh, he escaped, let's get him, we gotta go out. He runs into this cemetery, and he goes down under this crypt or whatever, and that's when Dr. Pretorius is trying to come and get a heart off of this body. They find this body down there, him and his cronies, and that's when Dr. Pretorius and Frankenstein meet down in this, where you mentioned earlier, where he was drinking wine, just sitting there relaxing. He just walks right up. Hey, how you doing? I'm Frankenstein.
Yeah. This is really weird, but the last movie that we did was King Kong, and I said something about, Kong looking like Jesus Christ with being held back and chained and all that stuff. Well, the same thing happens to the monster here. He's strung up on a pole, and they're throwing rocks at him, and they're stringing him up like Jesus Christ because he's an outsider and all that stuff. And it's really weird that both of these films happen to be monster films, and both of them happen to have that sort of symbolism. And yeah, I forgot about the mob just really going to town on Frankenstein. They shoot him multiple times, and they try to burn him. And I don't know. I don't know if at one point they overpower him, but basically the monster, he's just scared. And they're all judging before they ever got to know him, just because of his appearance, and because he's literally just a bunch of stitched up corpse pieces, and is this weird deformity that nobody's ever seen before. So people fear what they don't understand, and that's true in this case. And yeah, Pretorius just chilling. He's drinking by himself. I think he has a skull there, and he's just laughing for no other reason aside from that he's just grave digging. And yeah, the monster just comes up, and he's just very nonchalant, just totally unexpected. He doesn't care about anything, and that's what's so great about him, is that he is just so confident, and he doesn't act like anybody else in the movie. It's wonderful. It's wonderful.
Yeah, I mean, he shows a lot more character, no pun intended, but he shows a lot more character in the Bride, where he was kind of more like a robot in Frankenstein. And that's where maybe the character really comes comes out more in this film, and it brings out the story as a whole. And that's maybe why The Bride of Frankenstein is considered such a monumental film. And Robert Osborne's book, The 52 Must-See Movies and Why They Matter, and the Essentials on Turner Classic Movies. But so we get the heart and we get the body. So Dr. Pretorius has the heart and he's got the body, and he has to blackmail Dr. Henry Frankenstein by kidnapping Elizabeth. And so we get to this point in the film where Frankenstein's got Elizabeth, and Frank, all right. And Henry's like, all right. I'll do whatever you want. Just don't hurt Elizabeth. Don't hurt my wife. And so basically this gets us into basically the third half of the film, or pretty close to the end of the film, where we're having this whole, I love these laboratories. I love, like, they have kites, and they have to have thunder and lightning, and you have to have this gadget move and this thing go, and this is all a bunch of junk in real life. None of this stuff could do anything in real life. This is all a bunch of junk, but it looks cool in this film, this whole setup of how to bring the bride to life. And of course Frankenstein comes, is that my wife? Is that my girl? And he's like, don't worry, we're still working. And Dr. Pretorius puts a needle in his throat, and poisons him, and he passes out for a while we're working on the body of the bride. And finally we get the bride. She comes to life after all this mumbo jumbo and stuff happens. All right, so get into this whole thing where we kidnap Elizabeth. Frankenstein shows up. He's like, are you guys creating my woman? Are you creating my woman? And you get all this setup, this really fancy kind of setup. And I get a kick out of all that stuff.
Yeah, it's very well set up, and it's a good scheme that he obviously had been planning for a long time. I know it's a little off topic, but I found that the Hunchback assistant, from the first film, is also played by the same guy, Dwight Fry, this time. And it's a different name, but it's just another Hunchback assistant. I don't know where he finds these guys, but and it's not Igor. The first film, it's Fritz. This film, his name is Carl. And yeah, there's a little funny thing that I'll save later for the finale that happens. But yeah, it's like, okay, Thesiger really plays into the villainous side well, and he's like, okay, you're going to do it as I say, or else Elizabeth's going to get the axe. And he basically manipulates the monster into kidnapping Elizabeth. And then, of course, Frankenstein is like very distraught, and he's like, okay, he twisted his arm far enough to, do it. And then he has to do all this stuff again, reluctantly this time. And it's all very well paced. It's all very well acted, very well shot as well. And you mentioned the music earlier. That's one of the things that Universal monster movies are amazing at. They have some of the best music ever. And if you don't believe me, just listen to the Wolfman and a lot of their music, and you've probably heard it before. But yeah, this whole setup to the finale is very well executed, and I sincerely believe that's because of James Whale's direction.
Yeah, he's an amazing director. All right, so we get into the classic line. You brought up, you and I did another episode. There's a classic, one of the greatest quotes of all time in that film, in King Kong. "'Twas beauty killed the beast." In this film, there was another great classic quote of all time. "It's alive! It's alive!" By Dr. Henry Frankenstein Clive. Colin Clive. It's on one of the AFI's 100 quotes of all time. And it's just, when you hear that "it's alive, it's alive" line, you're like, yeah, I'm watching Frankenstein. And this is a classic. It's been used in, people joke about it, and it's been used in other films and so forth. But then we have that fatal meeting between Frankenstein and the bride. And like a lot of relationships, things don't go so well. Uh, our beautiful bride is not really enamored with our monster so much, Billy. What can you say about that?
You hate me because I'm gonna have to correct you again. That line was from the first film. You're gonna, I really.
I rewatched it, Billy. It's in there.
Oh, okay, okay, and oh yeah, um, Pretorius just goes like the Bride of Frankenstein, even though Frankenstein's the name of the scientist, not the monster, which I always found really funny. And then the bride's not in this film for very long. Many people don't realize that she's maybe in it for like 5 minutes. All she does is like twitch her head, make cat noises for some reason, and it's really her look that people remember because it's such. There's something about that look that you can't quite place your finger on that you just instantly want to look at with just the enormous hairdo, the gray streaks in it. It's just a simple bride gown. And yeah, she like all the other people in this movie judges Frankenstein by his appearance. And that's just really really sucks for the monster because not even a fellow disfigured creation will even look at you, let alone love you. And all he did was just touch her hand, and he was trying to be gentle about it, and he was. But yeah, she was just repulsed by his appearance, and it just, you're right, nothing goes well for the monster, and it's really sad.
All right, Billy. That about does it for this episode of the 52 Must See Movies and Why They Matter. Thank you once again for being on this episode talking about the Bride of Frankenstein. You and I did a couple monster movies. Of all the classic great movies out there, there are some great monster movies in some of the greatest films and some of the most essential films. Don't you think that's a fun thing about movies is you don't know what's going to turn out to be an essential film, a classic years and years later?
Yeah, and before we wrap up, we actually forgot to talk about the finale. So basically, everything goes to shit. Before this, the monster throws off Carl from a building, which is funny because Karloff threw Carl off the building, and yeah, there's a self-destruct button that the monster is just like, okay, look, I'm gonna press this, and you guys just go. I have nothing to live for. Just click, and then it destroys the place. And I forget what happened to Pretorius, but I know he. Oh no, he was in the building with the bride and the monster as well. So
yeah, he basically lets Henry and Elizabeth go, and Frankenstein presses the button, blows up the whole laboratory with him and the bride and Dr. Pretorius because he wanted to get revenge because Dr. Pretorius is saying, "Oh, I'm going to make you a wife. I'm going to get you a woman." And she doesn't like him, so he's mad at her. I had it in my notes, Billy. It was sitting right there in my notes, and I forgot all about talking about the end of the film. So I'm glad you brought that up before we ended the show.
Yeah, I wanted to talk about it because it's just an explosive finale, and yeah, just the arc of the monster. The first film was more about the scientist, Dr. Frankenstein. The Bride of Frankenstein is more about the monster Frankenstein. And also, this is a sequel. So usually sequels don't do that. Many of them just rehash all these things. But no, this did something where it just progressed the characters and told a different story. And they borrowed a lot from the rest of Mary Shelley's novel as well. The beginning of that movie is literally just Mary Shelley going like, hey, this is how exactly it happened, even though in the novel that's not at all how it happened. And yeah, everything is just it's magic. It's essential because it's magic. And if you want to get into universal horror, I would say watch the first film if you want the context of this. That would definitely help. But even then, it's like, yeah, it's just a good film on its own.
Yeah, it really is. It really stands the test of time, and it stands on its own as one of the greatest films. That's why AFI's got it on its list at number 50, I believe. And so when AFI's got a film at number 50 on their list, it's obviously a great, great, great film, and considered one of the greatest monster movies of all time in a genre that sometimes can be hokey and campy. There's a lot of heart and a lot of drama and a lot of character building in The Bride of Frankenstein. That's why it's an essential film. Absolutely, Billy. But we are finished with this episode. And once again, I want to thank my co-host, Billy Pollihan. Where can you be found?
You can find me on Twitter at bbusterbill. All the letters are capitalized. You can find me on Facebook, Billy Pollihan. It's just my name. And you can find me on Instagram, Blockbuster Bill, lowercase b's this time. And yeah, just hit me up on Screen Junkies page. I'm often there, and the Schmoes Know page. I love to meet new people and just talk movies and really anything. I just love meeting people around the world. And I mean, that's how I met Dan, and it has blossomed into a very good friendship.
Yes, absolutely. Billy is a very good friend. He's a good young kid from St. Louis. And I've never been to St. Louis, but I met this man from St. Louis, and he had a lot of similar characteristics as me. And one of the things is we love movies, and that's why I have people like Billy and Andrew and Steven and Mark do this series of 52 must-see movies, because these guys have a knowledge about movies of all genres, monster movies, classics, comedies, dramas, black and white, you name it. These guys know what they're talking about, and that's who I want to surround myself with when we're talking about these type of movies. And Robert Osborne, he deserves people that love these movies and want to talk about them, and that's why we're doing this series. Billy will be on a few more episodes before this is all over, so you'll get to see him again down the road. You can find me at Dan Skip Allen on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, and Pinterest, or at From the Fourth Row. I also do a podcast with my co-host Benny Laspada called The Best Damn Movie Show. Also on this very channel, The Best Damn Movie Show YouTube channel, I do a weekly show called The Top 5 Weekly with my co-hosts Andrew Cabral and Stephen Billings. There's a lot of different places you can find me. I'm all over the place. So good night, and see you next time.